Hey everybody, it's Rory from ANSgear. We've got some Luxes up on the table, some TM40s, because Exalt has a brand new trigger for the TM40. So this is the Exalt Deuce trigger for the TM40. So it is obviously a different shape trigger. Instead of having this flat two-finger trigger, it's got a deuce. They call it a deuce style right there. So there's like a little lump in the middle right there for your two fingers to fit in there. You can use 3 fingers, you could use 1 finger. It doesn't matter how many fingers you use, but it is a deuce trigger. Now there are 2 differences between this trigger and the stock trigger, besides just the front profile of it right there. One of them being more of a cosmetic setup right there, but one of them being very important. And I think they've solved the problem that I have seen happen on plenty of TM40. So we'll talk about that when we get to it in just a second. Now, colorways for the trigger, we've got a gold, a red, a black, a gray, and a silver. There is also a blue that is available. Right now, I just don't have the blue one. We're going to take the red one and we're going to throw it into here. But before we do that, we'll kind of look at the differences and talk about the differences and why one difference really makes a big difference right there. So let's get the first trigger out. Get some tools here and pull the original trigger out. If you're familiar with the Luxe, pulling triggers out is very easy. I'm going to set that barrel off to the side. I'm going to move this one out of the way here. And then we're going to pull this trigger off. So with the quick release grips, I'm just going to take them off the left side right there. And then we are going to unscrew the pivot pin, or the trigger pin. And we're going to lift it out like that. And then that will allow us to just take our trigger right out the front. Now, usually they slide out super easy. If you have a brand new TM40 and you do that and it doesn't want to slide out, sometimes some of these screws can be just a thread further than normal and it kind of doesn't like to let it out. But for most of the time, it should just pop right out the front. Now we'll take this red Deuce trigger from Exalt right here, pop it off, and we'll look at the differences right here. So here's our triggers. So the main difference, obviously the shape along the front, but other than that, we've got a positioning difference on the top of the trigger. So if we take our bearings and we line them up together, so the bearing is going to be the constant where the trigger will always sit. So whether it's this trigger or the other one, the bearing is always going to be in the same spot between the 2 triggers. So if we look at where the top finger would rest against the trigger when it is in the gun, very different right here. I'm going to try to get these as close to the same with the top right there as we can. Your top trigger would be top finger would be much further forward on the stock version than it would be on the new version. So an ergonomic positioning of the top finger, it really comes down to how that feels to you. That's going to be one of the differences right there. That top trigger is going to, I keep calling it a top trigger. That top finger is going to be further back. Maybe that's more comfortable. It keeps both your fingers more in line with each other. That's up to you. Not a big difference right there, just really an ergonomic difference right there. Now the second difference, and probably the most important difference on this trigger setup, is how they've positioned the screws and what those screws do right there. If we look at the original trigger, we have a screw that sticks up on the top, on the back side of the trigger right here. The new trigger, as we can see, does not have that screw on it. That screw, or the functionality of that screw, has been moved from the top of the trigger to the back side of the trigger right here. So these 2 screws do the exact same job. They just do them in different positions. And this makes a world of difference right here when it comes to avoiding a potential problem. So let me take this frame off real quick and we'll talk about what that is. All right, so with the stock trigger in the gun, if it's in like this, when the trigger rotates backwards, right? You pull the trigger and it goes backwards like this. You've got the bottom of the trigger, which is hitting the micro switch on the inside of the gun, click, 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 causing the gun to shoot. But you've also got this screw at the top, which is going to be butting up against this section right here of the body. And when it hits that part, that's what stops the trigger from traveling any further back. Now, because this interacts with this, the only way to know if where your trigger is stopping is to have the frame and the body together. That way, when you pull the trigger, it moves backwards, hits the body, and it stops. Problem with that is you can't see inside the frame to know how far your trigger is moving before it hits your micro switch and then potentially stops or doesn't stop before the back of it hits the micro switch in its fully compressed position and then moves even further. So it's very easy, and I've seen it happen many times, for these triggers to be set up improperly by a customer, where it is able to travel further than it should, and the activation portion of the trigger smashes the micro switch and either breaks it off the board, bends it back, smashes the leaf spring on it, and renders the switch no good. It just breaks the switch. Now, if that happens, then you're replacing your board. But Exalt solved that problem by using a different position on the stop. So inside here, inside the trigger, we've got a wall that's right here, a metal wall. You can see it right inside of there. They're using that wall as the stop for that screw right there. So when this is installed, we can just slide this into our frame right here. Come on, you. I'm up a little too high, which is what's happening here. And we put this in. We can tighten this down. And then we can look inside and we can see where the micro switch is being hit. And we can see where that screw is traveling to and then stopping against the wall that's inside there. So it makes it easy to set up so that we're not running into a potential problem where we're breaking or smashing anything. And that is a huge difference right there. It's not going to make a difference on how the trigger performs, how it feels, anything like that. But it potentially solves a problem that could cost you money right there. So I believe it's a great upgrade right there. It comes in a bunch of different triggers. As you can see, it's easy to put in. It took me a couple minutes. If I wasn't blabbing on along, it would take, 30 seconds to put this trigger in right there. But the shape is cool. It has the same functionality as the original trigger, all the same activation, magnetic return, all that stuff is there. They've just moved some stuff to potentially eliminate a very big problem right there. So I recommend putting this in, even if you don't really like the shape. Save yourself some problems potentially right there. Brand new triggers from Exalt, the Deuce trigger for the TM40. It's available in a bunch of colors. Check them out on the website at ANSgear.com.